Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask Adam Live. ASK is the acronym for Always Seek Knowledge. That is what I hope this and each and every episode that I put forth, well, that it drives you to ask, to seek knowledge about yourself, about the world around you, and about other people. I feel like the more we know, well, about ourselves, about the world we're in, and about how others are, I think then we can truly act and, well, commingle on this big round ball called Earth. So I encourage you to ask, to always seek knowledge, be inquisitive about life, and understand the world around us. In this episode, revenue rhythms make income predictable. This is part of our business series. Let's begin. Income becomes predictable when your actions become repeatable. Most people don't have an income problem, they have an inconsistency problem. See, if you're in sales, some months are strong, others are dry. Leads come in waves. Sales feel unpredictable, and stress rises when income dips. Revenue isn't random, it's a pattern. I can share with you my several years in real estate. Well, at first they got interesting. Then I understood that, well, it's a rhythm. And how to best get into that rhythm? Well, then you start to, well, know how the rhythm works and you know when to dance. Insurance, well, it was the kind of the same way. There was a certain season to selling insurance. It wasn't all the time. Sometimes it was the beginning of the month, certain times of the year where sales were great. And then certain times of the year, you could almost set your watch to the fact that, well, just wasn't going to happen. Even my ins and outs in the supply chain world, no matter what the product was in the supply chain aspect of things, there was always a season for it. We had our Super Bowl, as they called it, the big game that we prepared for throughout the entire year was for this one moment in time when sales were great, when you had to be there, all hands on deck, if you will, to get it done. And even working on this business, there's a season to it, there's a rhythm. It's understanding that and knowing that there's cycles. I can share with you also that when your activity is inconsistent, well, your income is going to be inconsistent as well. However, when your activity is structured, well, then you'll start to see your income stabilize. Now I know you may be saying, my income is stable. I get a check every week. I go to my job and I get paid. That's great. You're part of the percentage that is a W 2 employee, and that's terrific. However, keep in mind that your business does have a season, and how you perform day in and day out will reflect the outcome of the company you work for and the revenues that they will have to share. So if the revenues aren't there at the end of the year, you can certainly count on the fact that there would not be any level of increase to that steady pay. However, I do encourage you to continue to listen because you never know. I think there's an entrepreneur in everyone, and you may find yourself one day becoming that 1099 contracted employee, where you're working each day for a little bit of the pie. I used to always joke in real estate when people would ask me how things are going, or how's the business, or how are you doing? And just for a laugh, I always liked the reaction. No matter whether it was my first year, my fifth year, my 10th year, or beyond, I would always share with them, you know, there's a certain of living edge on life when you wake up each day unemployed. And they would be puzzled. What do you mean? I said, well, you wake up, you basically don't have a job until you do something, meaning you're not getting paid until there's some level of activity. Now, that's not how I conducted my business, but it was always interesting to put that into perspective. I would also share with them, if they got the joke or not, depending on if they did, I guess, how deep we were going to continue the conversation, was that I shared with them we did have a structure, and then I did have a pattern, and that things were consistent. But it still goes to the same basic premise that you woke up each day pretty much unemployed. You could go do what you wanted and have some fun, or you could get to work and ensure that there was some income that was going to be shared with you by the end of the month, by the end of the quarter, or even by the end of the year. Today, I'll show you a 5-part revenue rhythm framework to stabilize and grow your income through a repeatable system. Like I said, this might not be something you're interested in today. Maybe bookmark this episode for when you become that 1099 employee, start filing quarterly and running your own business. I think eventually we're all going to get to that point in our life where you want to do your own thing. You're kind of tired of doing it for someone else. And strategically, you found all of the mistakes that your employer has made and sort of figured out how to build that proverbial better mousetrap, right? So let's get started. Part 1. Why income feels unpredictable. Income volatility usually comes from an inconsistent outreach, no tracking activity, a lack of follow-up, or having a system to do so. Maybe you found yourself emotionally selling and not utilizing structured selling. And finally, no pipeline that's visible, meaning you don't have a sequence of connecting with your client or customer. I can share with you what you don't track, you can't stabilize. So you got to start a little bit with the basics. First, forecast. What do things look like? I found I didn't really ask the question in my first year of real estate. I just was under the assumption that if you worked really hard, the business would come. And at first it did. But it was also the season that I began. So in my season of the business, things were great. Then there was a quiet period. And I began to question, was it me? What happened to the flow? Then there was a really dry period for about a month. Wasn't excited about this because it was towards the end of the year. It was then I learned the ebbs and flows of the market. I can share with you, if you're just starting out doing something, find that seasoned veteran and ask them. Help them or ask them to help you forecast how things go so that you can better know. Unlike myself, where you kind of learn the hard way? I should have asked. I would have, like a squirrel, saved some for those lean seasons. Instead, I struggled and I found myself getting frustrated and working twice as hard when it wasn't necessary. But once I understood the seasons and the ebbs and flows of the market, well, then I learned better to prepare. The throughput, what you're doing, what is your process, and how much are you doing? Could you do a little bit more? Also, what's your flow? I appreciated creating a flow, usually on the weekend. I found that's when things were busy. That's when most people had some free time to, well, come and look at real estate. So my week actually began on, say, Friday, and I would build up that business of meeting with individuals. Yeah, it was some appointments set up on the calendar, and some were just general walk ins, but that started the conversation, and that was part of my flow. I welcomed both because it filled my calendar for the next week or the next month, was having that open opportunity to have those beginning conversations for someone that was just strolling in one day, or someone that just called in and said, "Hey, we've got some time and we'd like to talk to someone." Those beginning conversations were great. And I loved every one of them. Again, because it was planning my future. But I had a process. See, I was building a revenue stream and a system. It wasn't just luck. Maybe some luck at the later part of it by building up multiple work processes and flows that, well, luck created the abundance, but it was also the preparedness of having those systems in place. Again, that was having a system, like I said, where someone would walk in and you'd have that initial conversation, which maybe led to a few phone calls or some online conversation, maybe sharing some additional information. Or, as my system, if I didn't get the answer to the 20 questions I was asking or in the initial appointment, there was the follow up with additional questions and even more questions until I was truly of the understanding of what my client was looking for. That way I could effectively set up the most beneficial opportunities for them, share those opportunities, and quite frankly, there wasn't really a question at the end of the day, which was best, because I showed them 3 to 5 of the best. They just needed to pick one. That was my system. Part two, the revenue rhythm framework. Number one, define your revenue drivers. What actually creates income in your business? Is it maybe booking calls? Maybe it's proposals that are sent out to potential clients. Is it the content that's being published? Or is it the conversations that are getting started? Whether it's through networking or someone coming to your place of business. See, most people I found focus on the outcomes. As I became more of a high performer, and I know this is how they operate, they focused more on the input. What activities create the outcomes? And that's where they put most of their energy. Because, like I said, quite frankly, Once I understood exactly what a client was looking for, it was pretty easy to find the top 3 to 5 that met all of their needs, or at least most of them. And I can share with you my real estate experience, the highest, most self absorbing compliment I could receive was at the end of our showing opportunity, whether it was one day or two, and it came to kind of making that decision. And they would always look at me and say, they are all perfect. We really don't know which one to choose. That was a compliment. That was me doing my homework for them on their behalf. That was my input. Now, I know that sounds easy. I strategically had 20 questions that I asked each and every client. Yeah, it was the basics. What location? What are the amenities? What type of home? All the generic stuff, of course. That was probably the first 5 to 8. Then it got into, is a commute a concern? Is, being in a remote location a concern? Drivability, accessibility. Do you want neighbors close or away from you? Do you want to see your neighbors? Do you want to be in a gated community? As I dove deeper into these, and again, listen to me, I didn't even ask how much you wanted to spend or how much you wanted to invest. I was understanding what you wanted. And not to say that money is no object. To me, that was just the last question. So, how much are you looking to put into this investment? Because once I asked all the other questions, I pretty much could frame, well, what they were going to spend. So, if they didn't mind being in a remote location, having all the amenities that were desirable, and didn't mind needing something that was fixed up, appreciated some neighbors but not being too close, I could pretty much put them in that price category. However, if they answered those questions, I don't want to say with difficulty, but demands, had to have this, had to have that, well, I could pretty much express to them what category they were already putting themselves into. Then they would start to change their mind. Again, notice how I framed they would change their mind. I'm getting a little off course, but I just want to share with you and focus a little bit on how the inputs, what they gave me, the responses I gave to them, and the decisions I allowed them to make, these were all inputs. The outcome was inevitable at this point. They were going to purchase something. It was just, was it in their budget and did it meet all their needs? Again, many times because, well, about 80% of my clientele were looking at second homes. It was kind of a whole new world, as they say. And so there was a slight education process to understanding what a specific property entailed, what it looked like, what upkeep or even just rehab looks like. In the city, sure, you can run down to the Home Depot and drive on a paved road, come back home and put all your stuff or even get a truck to deliver. But if you're located on top of a hill with a dirt and rocky road, the odds are that the Lowe's truck's going to get that load of timber to your house in the driveway. Well, it might be slightly different. So, considering that location and whether or not you want to be involved in some upgrades or upkeep, well, that was a deciding factor for the client. And again, understanding the rural nature of these second homes and their locations, very beautiful, by the way, either by the river or on top of the hill or both. I digress. Number 2, set weekly activity targets. For example, maybe it's 20 outreach messages. Maybe it's 10 follow ups. Maybe it's 5 calls creating bookings. I can tell you one of the things that was a controllable for me was once a quarter just sending out cards. I usually had a listing in the area. So I would send out a card. Hey, I've listed this property. Have you considered selling yours or know anyone who is? Something simple like that, once a quarter, predictably, always rendered 3 to 5% return. See, these predictable inputs create predictable outputs. I knew this. So every quarter, it was already on my calendar. I would spend a short moment of time putting this together, send it to the publish company, and get it sent out. I already knew what the return was. The negotiation was more of, well, the expense. I can share with you the one uncontrollable was postage because the postmaster at that time and still is raising the price of a stamp. Now, I was able to adjust this by having a business account. So if you're mailing things, consider a business account with the post office and do a bulk letter rate instead of the mailing letter rate. Again, set up your controllables and know. Maybe start small with 200, work your way to 500. I remember the mailings got up to 2,000 just because I started stretching it out a little bit. I remember just looking at a specific street and then a specific neighborhood and then a specific area. And pretty soon I was like, well, that corner of the county, I might as well just send out 2,000. I was already doing it. The information was already there. And again, it was that outreach. I remember when I said my return was 3 to 5%. So my input at first was about 200, return of 3, 5%. Now that I've upgraded to 2,000, I changed my input, obviously changed my output. Still 3 to 5% of 2,000, not 200. So set these activities. Remember, they're your targets. Your measured input creates your predictable output. Number 3, build a simple pipeline. Track your leads, conversations, your opportunities, and closed deals. So many people miss this. And I remember sharing with my agents, the ones that worked with me, as well as fellow agents that worked under the same umbrella as I did. I remember saying, hey, you closed the deal. Now what's next? And they said, find more business. I said, you just had business. What's next? Well, I'm going to go out and find more business. I understand that. You just had business. Go back to the business you just had. You're not done. Closed deals are people that love you, like you, have worked with you, have hopefully great things to say about you. That is still business. Just because you've completed that transaction doesn't mean they don't know someone that they would recommend, and just being in touch with them. Quite frankly, all of my clients were relationship based, where we developed that camaraderie between each other. And the transaction, well, it went well. And they raved afterwards about how smooth and systematic the transaction was, even the difficult ones. Yeah, it was bumpy, but you seemed to know all the next steps, and we were always headed towards the next step, even though there was some bumps along the way. Again, I had a system in place. Even a basic spreadsheet works for starters. Now, I'm sure there's several companies out there in your field of business that offer different opportunities of keeping your clientele in line and remind you to stay in touch. If you're just starting out, start with a simple Excel spreadsheet. Quite frankly, with the advent of artificial intelligence, you can utilize and set up formulas that will create triggers for you and tell you when things are due, when to follow up with someone. Start simple and basic. And remember, with this spreadsheet that you set up, you can always convert that information into whatever software you decide to adopt. But for now, if you're starting with a handful of names, start with a spreadsheet. Once you've exceeded 2 to 500, maybe consider elevating up to some software that's going to give you a little bit more automation if you haven't already utilized AI to do so. Just like when I was in supply chain, having that visibility of the season, well, that reduced the uncertainty. You knew when things ebbed and flowed, when things were slow, and when you could predict they were going to speed up. Granted, there was a few hiccups through the years where the economy was slightly adjusted and so predictions didn't follow through. I didn't change my mind or my thinking. I just realized there was an external factor causing something to occur that particular year, knowing that in that particular industry, it still had a season. And once things, well, fell back to normal, economically speaking, we were right back into the same seasonal flow. Number 4, install follow up systems. Here, I believe most sales are lost at this stage. Remember what I said? Oh, we closed. The relationship's not over. It's actually just beginning. You'll find that even after the transaction, if you provide value to that past client or customer, I should say previous client or customer that you worked with intimately, now follow up with them. Maybe there's some helpful hints about the business. Maybe there's some information. Maybe you're creating a new product line or a new service that's available. Share this with them. You might want to start out with a follow up system like this. And you can do this even with your first customer or the one you just closed with. Day 1, follow up. Maybe that's a phone call, an email, or both. It was great to work with. How about a text message? You've understood, past client, how they like to communicate, utilize that. For a new client, understand how they best want to be communicated with. Utilize that. Day 1, send them something. Phone call, email, text message. Day 3, same thing. However their contact method is preferred, day 3, send a communication. You also want to do the same thing on day 7, then on day 14. By this point, you should understand a little bit of where they're at. Now, statistically saying, I understand that in today's world, they say it's anywhere from 8 to 21 touches or reaches to convert a client or customer. True, but remember, we're just getting started. The 1, 3, 7, and 14, this is where you're going to get a feel. Where are they at in the process? Are they excited? Then you repeat. Are they still on the fence? Maybe you're going to stretch them out to once every 30 days. Maybe you're going to stretch them out to once every 45 days. Maybe once a quarter every 90 days. Just be in touch. But let me share with you that consistency beats intensity. Just be consistent. Whatever the setup, place them in what they call a funnel and reach out to them on that consistent basis. Again, maybe it's every 90 days for that initial period till you start to get the sense of the conversion. Then it's 1, 3, 7, 14. Create monthly review cycles. At the end of each month, ask yourself and be honest. What worked? Ask yourself what didn't. And be ultimately honest with what needs adjusting. Truly. I could say I've made the mistake once or twice where I thought, I should try it again. I just don't think it was the right time. And I should have stopped at the first because the results weren't good. I wasn't reading the room, as they say. This is where rhythm becomes refinement. Once you see what works, like I said, every quarter, I sent out 2,000 cards. I knew there was always the 3 to 5% response, and that was kind of like a perpetual thing. Now, did I rest on my 3 to 5? No. I just knew that was an avenue of connecting with individuals that, didn't know me yet. But once I found the rhythm, created the refinement, and I really didn't adjust it much. The card was always the same. It was just what 2,000 people were going to get it this quarter. Part 3, the psychology of predictable income. Behavior becomes identity through repetition. Remember in some of my workshops where I've discussed in depth the neuroencoding aspect of things, activity repeated becomes your default state. This is your outcome through repetition, not through your identity. When outreach is daily, follow-up is scheduled, and your pipeline is visible, then your income becomes less emotional and more controlled. Doing something each day, each week, each month, and each quarter, knowing the results. You don't have to start asking the question, what if? You already know. This kind of starts to take the emotion out of, will there be enough income at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter to set up my business budget? It's actually more controlled because you've created this activity through repetition. And like I mentioned, you've started to see what works and what doesn't and focused on more of the working process than the non-working process. This is important. Like I said, you can spend a lot of time with the energy of sending something out that just doesn't have the right feedback or trying to tweak it. I remember one agent, they always wanted to do something different. Hey, I like this particular house. I think I want to do it this way. Or it's springtime. Maybe I should put flowers on my card. Or it's summertime. And don't make it crazy. Keep it simple. Again, I found consistency. What's your message? Be to the point, concise about what you're trying to say to your clients, potential clients, and that's it. And then set up that follow up action where when you responded to the card, I reached out. We had a conversation. From that conversation, I reached out again. I reached out again. And it wasn't necessarily a reaction to that conversation. It was more of having that conversation and then reminding them who I was and what I did. Remember, they didn't always make the decision on that first phone call, hey, let's work together. It was more curiosity. I knew that. Again, it wasn't emotional. They didn't want to go further with me. Said, oh, okay, I was just calling. I was just curious. Appreciate your time. I wasn't emotional about them wasting my time. I was actually more excited that I had the opportunity to follow up with them with more about who I am and what I do. See, that phone call, that conversation, them reaching back out to me was kind of that proverbial handshake, if you will, saying, hey, I think I like what you do. I would be interested in knowing more about how you do it. See, no emotion. And I was in control. So I'd send them things about what I was doing, about what I could do for them, allowing them to make the association and the connection and seeing the benefits that I can offer when working with me. This offered more control without emotion. Quite frankly, plugging that into my system of consistency rendered results every single time. Here's some common mistakes. Only working when motivated. How many of us out here only work when we feel like it? That's devastating. That is not going to build consistency in your business, as well as not tracking your activity, knowing that what you put in should have an outcome. Giving up on the follow up too early. Now, I might let the cat out of the bag on this one. I was pretty relentless. I followed up with people pretty much till they screamed and said, no, stop, leave me alone. Wasn't very often because, again, I was sharing value with them. I was giving them examples of what working with me was like, what I offered, as well as, well, some helpful information. I remember in my newsletter, it would spring cleaning for your house, uh, summertime things you can do with your house, winter preparation for that second home. This was all valuable information. And quite frankly, whether you worked with me or not, I felt like I was doing you a favor by letting you know you should probably make sure that your toilets don't freeze by putting some systematically approved non-freezing agent into your toilet so it doesn't crack while you're not at your second home for the winter. This was valuable information. And again, I was helping you out. You know, a tip from your Uncle Al. Just doing you a favor, giving you some nice advice. I wasn't assuming because I did this you were going to work for me. I kind of already knew that we were going to get together eventually. And I can also share with you that some clients, even though we didn't necessarily have a transaction, we still had a relationship. And it was through that relationship that they had a friend or a family member that they referred to me because I had developed a relationship with them. So, see, it's not always the transaction. So, let me dial back to the motivation. Just because the person you're working with isn't a live wire ready to transact and do something today, you don't know who they know. Get into that relationship with them first and share with them the value of your business and what you're offering, because you never know who they know or what business that they may eventually need from you. So giving up on follow up too early, that can be detrimental. Overcomplicating systems. Oh my gosh. When your funnel's got 6 different directions, that's difficult. I shared with you the easy. Systematically set it up where your follow up is consistent. Once you've established that there is a time period that you're working with, then stretch it out and have that system. Again, have that in place. Is it once a month? 12 times a year. Maybe it's every 90 days. That's only 4 times a year. Maybe it's once a year. It's a holiday card. Whatever that system follow up is, maybe it's 30 days. That's a newsletter. Whatever that follow up is, set them up on that until they're ready to do some business and or share their intimate family or friends with you to be part of your business. One of the last common mistakes is ignoring your data. If someone's not opening an email or maybe responding to you, you're having trouble calling them, if you're following up and they don't answer the phone, that's data. The other thing is the consistency with the publications that you send out. If people aren't opening your newsletter, if you're not getting feedback from your cards, maybe it's complicated. What is it you're saying in your mailing cards that say, hey, I'm interested in doing some business with you. Here's what we do. If that's complicated and they don't know how to reach you, well, that's the data you got to pay attention to. So ignoring data, crucial. You want to be able to make those pivotal moves while you're also small. That's where I found simplicity. Remember the mailers? Kept it simple. No fluff. I changed an address and sent it out. That's all I had to do. Kept it simple. I still got 3 to 5%. I'm sure if I put something on there, maybe I got 1 or 2 more percent. But that could have been a one and done thing just for that particular season. I'll give you an example. The particular county I was in, I did the one card. I got rave reviews, but the courthouse caught fire. And ironically, it was about 2 weeks before it caught fire. I took a really beautiful picture of the courthouse. I happened to just be walking through town, had my camera in my pocket, took a great color filled spring flowers. Everything was great. Well, turns out that iconic photo was now worth something of a strange value. I then took that and put it in my publication that I sent out. Yeah, those 2,000 cards. I got the same 3 to 5% feedback. However, I got something additional. Many people had it as a keepsake. Many people called and just appreciated that they had something to remember by. That was a touch of business, kind of a one and done. I don't know that if I kept sending out the same image, I would have gotten the same response. And or I'm not sure that you could ever replicate that again. Maybe if there's that bicentennial, if there's that specific once in a lifetime thing that you'd want to share, that might make sense. But just keep your marketing consistent and don't try to adjust it too much. First of all, it gets very confusing and you just want the message simple. Here's what I do and here's how I do it. Let's stay in touch. I can give you some life examples, such as with the speaking business here. Ask Adam Live. The old way of just posting content randomly, hoping for inbound traffic, and then possibly being stressed when nothing happens. Well, instead of doing that, the way I approached it is 20 outreach messages a week, reaching out to people who are interested and even those who might not be. Because again, you don't know who they might know. 5 follow ups each day. Also, tracking leads on a sheet. So there's that consistent follow up each and every time. And then applying a weekly review from the above. The 20 outreach messages. What was the follow up? A weekly review of the 5 follow ups per day. So that's 5 times 5, sometimes 6. I was keeping track of that. And then the follow up, setting up that system and process so that there was consistency. The results, pipeline builds, income stabilizes. You can apply this to any industry that you're in. Your income becomes predictable when your behavior becomes predictable. Let me repeat that. Income becomes predictable when your behavior becomes predictable. Build the rhythm, and the results will follow. This has been another inspiring, excellent episode of Ask Adam Live. Be sure to download the worksheet. And remember, let us all go out and make it a great day.